You gotta wonder why some homes sit abandoned for decades, especially big, huge mansions. What dark secrets have led to these places being left to rot? Gruesome crimes, disturbing hauntings, curses? Let's find out. One look at Villa de Vecchi in Italy, and it's really no surprise that it has such a dark past. I mean, it just looks like it fits the bill. Of course, being abandoned and derelict never helps matters, but still, the place looks pretty haunted. It's now become known as one of the most haunted spots in Italy, often referred to as the House of Witches. It was built in 1857 as a summer home for a man named Felix de Vecchi and his family, who suffered a lot of tragedy in the years following. Things were kind of foreboding from the start when the architect died during the construction of the building, but the real horror began in 1862. The story goes that Felix de Vecchi came home to find his wife killed and his daughter missing. The famous occultist Aleister Crowley is said to have also practiced rituals on the property. The place has been totally vacant for decades, but strange stuff still goes on, like the avalanche in 2002 that leveled everything in the area except the House of Witches, which was left completely untouched. Next on the list is the Lucy House in Uniontown, Alabama. Now, many homes in Uniontown stand totally abandoned. Environmental issues have driven a huge portion of the population out, but the Lucy House isn't just another abandoned home being overtaken by nature. No, this one is home to a very dark case. In 1994, the remains of a boy named Alan Lucy were found buried under the front porch, putting an end to a decade-old mystery. Alan Lucy lived in the home with his adoptive parents, Philip and Margaret Lucy. In May of 1985, he went missing though. A search was launched, but there were no signs of him anywhere. But then a creepy story started to spread around town. The couple's biological son, Jason, began telling classmates at school that he'd seen his father burying Alan after having killed him. Now, for some reason, his story was never taken seriously until the home had been sold and renovations were underway, and the skeletal remains of Alan Lucy were finally found. Philip Lucy was then put behind bars. The Liu family mansion, aka the Mínxíong ghost house in Taiwan, has been abandoned for over 70 years, and it's known as one of the most haunted spots in the country. The Liu family packed up and left, and it's always been a bit of a mystery as to why. There are plenty of rumors and urban legends though, of course. One story goes that the maid was having an affair with the husband, Liu Rongyu, and when the wife found out, she made the maid's life a living hell until she couldn't handle it anymore, jumping down a well. But she wasn't gone for good. On a nightly basis, the tormented spirit of the maid would return to the home, terrorizing the family until they finally decided it was time to pack up and leave. Some say her ghost still haunts the abandoned property to this day. Another tale tells of Japanese soldiers who were holding up at the abandoned mansion during World War II. While the soldiers slept, one was keeping guard, but things turned to complete chaos when he caught a glimpse of this shadowy figure lurking around the property and opened fire. The other soldiers then woke up and in a panic started shooting too, but in the darkness and confusion they all died, having accidentally fired at each other. Next up, we have the Los Feliz House, which sat abandoned in LA's Los Feliz neighborhood for a long time. It was only just recently sold in 2020. 2475 Glendower Place is pretty infamous for a very disturbing incident on December 6th, 1959. Dr. Harold Perelson and his family lived at the home. Dr. Perelson was pretty successful, obviously. I mean, he owned a mini mansion, but at some point his mental state began to deteriorate, and the nail in the coffin was when he was screwed out of the rights to a new syringe he'd invented, having invested a ton of money in it as well. This is seemingly what threw him over the edge, and on that night in December, he snapped, killing his wife in her sleep with a hammer. Then he moved on to his eldest daughter's room. As soon as he struck her with the hammer though, she let out a scream and began pleading for her life as her father told her to lay still and keep quiet. The other siblings woke up though, all running out in the hallway to find out what was going on. Miraculously, they all managed to escape. Neighbors had heard the commotion and phoned the police, but by the time authorities arrived at the home, a copy of Dante's The Divine Comedy was left open on his nightstand, with the opening passage of the page reading, "Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward path had been lost." Next on the list is Lennox Castle in Scotland, which has sat abandoned for years. It's in total disrepair and has been in especially bad shape after a fire in 2008. The place looks like your quintessential haunted castle, but double whammy, it was also a former mental hospital. It was originally built in 1841 for John Lennox Kincaid, who had ties to a notable Scottish clan. But in 1927, the land was purchased by the Glasgow Corporation, and the castle underwent a big transformation, being repurposed as a hospital for the mentally ill. Then in World War II, it was converted into a hospital for soldiers, and the mentally ill patients were transported to other buildings on the property. Life inside Lennox Castle was far from peaceful. Fights between patients were common. In one incident, a riot broke out, causing chaos and significant damage to one of the wards. Things got so out of hand that a lot of the staff, along with uninvolved patients, fled the hospital, leaving the rioters locked inside. By the 80s, the hospital had become completely outdated, and it finally closed in 2002, and it's been vacant ever since. There are tons of abandoned mansions on what is often referred to as Billionaires Row in London, but one of them has a particularly dark history. One of these mansions, Kingsdean, was used by one of the creepiest cults in history, the Children of God, now called the Family International. If you feel like getting a good night's sleep tonight, this is a cult you're gonna probably want to avoid hearing about. The group was founded in the late 60s by dirtbag David Berg, who later became known as Moses David. The group mixed evangelical Christianity with free love ideology, regardless of age. Female members were encouraged to use intimacy in order to recruit new followers. It was highly exploitative, especially of course when it came to young people who had been born and raised within the cult. Over the years, as more survivors came forward with their stories, authorities began to investigate the COG. Leadership has changed, but the fact that this group is still around in any form is just unbelievable. The house in New Jersey where this next awful tragedy took place burnt down in the 70s, but the property is still said to have a lingering dark energy about it, and it's not hard to see why. This case is pretty grim, and the new home is pretty much identical to the old one. So in 1971, a man named John List killed his wife, his mother, and 2 offspring, all in the home. Then he left the house, went to his son's soccer game as if nothing had happened, and then killed him too once they returned home. Then he brought all the bodies into the ballroom, lined them up, cut his own face out of a family photo, and left the scene. Authorities later arrived at the home to find the bodies. All the lights were also on and the radio was blaring, tuned into a Christian radio station. John List wasn't caught until 1989. He'd fled to Denver and taken on a whole new identity. He'd even met a woman there who he'd married in 1985. The Winchester Mansion in San Jose, California is not only said to be one of the most haunted mansions in the United States, but one of the strangest. And not just one of the strangest mansions in America, but the entire world. This place is absolutely bonkers. And that's all because of Sarah Winchester, who is the wife of William Wirt Winchester of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. When Mr. Winchester died in 1881, the widowed Sarah became a little unhinged, to say the least. She began to believe that the people who'd died at the hands of her husband's Winchester rifles were now haunting her. So she started hiring workers to come in and build all these add-ons to the home, very few of which made any sense at all. The purpose? To disorient and confuse the ghosts that were apparently after her. The Winchester was always under construction. Maze-like hallways and staircases were built, leading nowhere. Doors were built for no apparent reason, and it just went on and on. The place is one big confusing nightmare, like an AI algorithm just took over with the design, not actually understanding the purpose of a home. That's a place I kind of want to check out, to be honest. Elda Castle in New York looks like a witch's house from an old fairy tale. tale. Not on the inside though. Graffiti covers the walls as the place has been abandoned for decades. There's been a rumor floating around for years that Elda Castle is cursed. The castle was the brainchild of David T. Abercrombie, the dude who helped kickstart Abercrombie and Fitch. He and his wife, Lucy Abbott Kate, were like, let's build a huge mansion. So they did, in the roaring 20s. But then, just as the paint dried and the mansion was all set, tragedy hit. First, their daughter Lucy died in an accident at her dad's factory. Then, Mr. Abercrombie himself died of rheumatic fever right there in the house. So Lucy Abbott Kate moved away with her oldest daughter. After Lucy's senior split though, Elda fell into disrepair. Over the years, a bunch of different people have tried to fix the place up, hoping to bring it back to its former glory, but each time they've been hit with rough patches themselves. Maybe this is a place that's just better off left alone. And finally, we have the Mudhouse Mansion in Lancaster, Ohio. This is just one of the many spooky spots in the great state of Ohio. An old, creepy house with a history full of equally eerie tales and urban legends. It was originally built back in the mid-1800s, a fancy home for a rich family, but as years passed, the mansion started to fall apart. Eventually, it was abandoned and left to rot. Over time, though, people began to tell stories about the mansion. One of the creepiest stories is that the family who lived there met a tragic end inside the mansion. Some versions of the legend say they were killed by someone. Others claim they went crazy after an evil entity attached itself to the house and tormented them. There's even a tale that Bloody Mary herself was born here. In 2015, the mansion was torn down, but that hasn't stopped all the stories. Some folks say they still see ghostly figures wandering around the area where the mansion used to stand. With all that said, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.